The German counter-attack of 25 September 1917 took place during the Third Battle of Ypres on the Western Front during the First World War. On the British 10th Corps front, south of 1st Anzac Corps, 2 regiments of the German 50th Reserve Division attacked on a 1,800-yard front. On either side of the Reutelbeek.The Gegenangriff was supported by aircraft and 44 field and 20 heavy batteries of artillery, 4 times the usual amount of artillery for a division. The attack was due to commence at 5:15 a.m., but the shells fell short onto the German assembly area and the German infantry had to fall back, until the barrage began to creep forward at 5:30 a.m. The German infantry managed to advance for about 100 yards near the Menin Road on the southern flank and 600 yards on the northern flank beyond the Reutelbeek, close to Black Watch Corner. The attack was supported by artillery observation aircraft, ground attack aircraft and a box barrage fired behind the British front line by the artillery, which isolated the British defenders from reinforcements and cut off the supply of ammunition. Return fire from the 33rd Division and the 15th Australian Brigade of the 5th Australian Division along the southern edge of Polygon Wood forced the attackers under cover around some of the Wilhelm Line pillboxes near Black Watch Corner at the southwestern edge of Polygon Wood. German attempts to reinforce the attacking troops failed, due to British artillery observers isolating the advanced German troops with artillery barrages. General Herbert Plumer, the commander of the Second Army, ordered the attack scheduled for the 26th of September to go ahead but modified the objectives of the 33rd Division. The 98th Brigade was to advance and cover the right flank of the 5th Australian Division, and the 100th Brigade was to recapture the lost ground. Further south, the Australian advance the next day began with uncertainty as to the security of the right flank. The attack of the depleted 98th Brigade was delayed and only managed to reach Black Watch Corner, 1,000 yards short of its objectives. Reinforcements moved forward into the 5th Australian Division area to the north and attacked southwest Ypres at noon, at the same time as a frontal attack from Black Watch Corner without artillery support, because troops were known to be holding out in the area captured by the Germans the day before. The attack succeeded by 2:00 p.m. against massed machine gun fire, and later in the afternoon, the 100th Brigade retook the lost ground north of the Menin Road. Casualties in the 33rd Division were so great that it was relieved on the 27th of September by the 23rd Division, which had only been out of the line since the night of 24-25 September. Background: strategic developments on the 20th of August 1917. The 2e Bataille offensive de Verdun was carried out by the French Second Army to capture Côte 304 and Mortom on the west bank and Côte Telou and Beaumont on the east bank of the Meuse. In 4 days, French troops captured Bois-d'Arvaucourt, Mortom, Bois-Corbeau and the Bismarck, Kronprinz and Gelwitz tunnels, which had connected the German front lines to the rear underneath Mortom and Côte 304. On the right bank, Bois-Telou, Champneuville, Côte 344, part of Bois-Fost, Bois-Chaume and Mormont Farm were captured. Next day, Côte 304, Samogneux and Regnieville fell, and on the 26th of August, the French reached the southern outskirts of Beaumont. By the 26th of August, the French had captured 9,500 prisoners, 30 guns, 100 trench mortars and 242 machine guns. After the success of the attack in August, Guillemot was ordered to plan an operation to capture capture several trenches and a more ambitious offensive to take the last ground from which German artillery observers could see Verdun. Patton questioned Guillemot and Fayol, who argued that the French could not remain in the present positions and must either advance or retire, advocating a limited advance to make German counter-attacks harder, improve conditions in the front line, and deceive the Germans about French intentions. The 2 Corps on the east bank made small attacks, 15th Corps on the 7th of September, which failed, and 32nd Corps the next day, which was a costly success. The attack continued and the trenches necessary for a secure defensive position were taken, but not the last German observation point. Further attempts to advance were met by massed artillery fire and counter-attacks. The French commanders ended the operation. The Kerensky offensive in Russia during July had accelerated the disintegration of the Russian army, increasing the prospect of substantial German reinforcements for the Western Front. The French attack at Verdun in July had been delayed until August, but had inflicted a defeat on the German Fifth Army similar in extent to the defeat of the Fourth Army in the Battle of Messines in June. Morale in the French army was still poor, and in reports to the War Cabinet on the 21st of August and the 2nd of September, Sir Douglas Haig had repeated his view that the British campaign at Ypres was necessary to shield the other armies of the alliance, regardless of the slow geographical progress being made. In the unusually wet weather of August, French preparations continued for an attack on the Aisne front, and the Third Army was working on a scheme for an attack with a mass of tanks on the Flesquières salient near Cambrai. France was running short of men, and at the end of September, the French Minister of War had been told that another defeat could provoke more mutinies, which would be terminal, and GHQ in France feared the possibility that the French might be forced into a separate peace. Tactical developments. The General Headquarters Staff of the British Expeditionary Force quickly studied the results of the attack of the 31st of July and on the 7th of August, sent questions to the Army headquarters about the new conditions produced by German defense in depth. The Fourth Army had spread strong points and pillboxes in the areas between its defensive lines and made rapid counter-attacks with local reserves and Eingriff divisions against Allied penetrations. Plumer issued a preliminary order on the 1st of September, which defined the Second Army area of operations as Broadside and the area southwards. The plan was based on the use of much more medium and heavy artillery, which had been brought to the Galliveld Plateau from 8th Corps, on the right of the Second Army, and by removing more guns from the Third Army and Fourth Army, which were further south in Artois and Picardy. The increased amount of heavy artillery was to be used to destroy German concrete shelters and machine gun nests, which were more numerous in the German battle zones than the outpost zones which had been captured in July and August, and to engage in more counter-battery fire. Few German concrete pillboxes and machine gun nests had been destroyed during earlier preparatory bombardments and attempts at precision bombardment before attacks had also failed. The 112 times heavy and 210 times field guns and howitzers in the Second Army on the 31st of July were increased to 575 times heavy and medium and 720 times field guns and howitzers for the battle, which was equivalent to one artillery piece for every 5 feet of the attack front, more than double the density at the Battle of Pilkem Ridge. Plumer's tactical refinement sought to defeat the German defense by making a shallower penetration and then fighting the principal battle against German Eingriff divisions. By further reorganizing the infantry reserves, Plumer ensured that the depth of the attacking divisions roughly corresponded to the depth of local German counter-attack reserves and the Eingriff divisions. More infantry was provided for the later stages of the advance to defeat German counterattacks, by advancing no more than 1,500 yards and then consolidating the positions, preferably on reverse slopes. When the Germans counter-attacked, they would encounter a British defence in depth protected by artillery and suffer many casualties to little effect, rather than the small and disorganised groups of British infantry that the Germans had driven back on the 31st of July 10 and the 16th of August. After the big defeat at the Battle of the Menin Road Ridge on the 20th of September, the Fourth Army changed the way that regiments and battalions were arrayed in the defensive positions. During August, each German frontline division had kept 2 regiments in the front position, with all 6 of the battalions, and the 3rd Regiment was held further back in reserve. The front battalions had needed to be relieved much more frequently than expected, due to constant British bombardments and the wet weather. Periods in the line were exhausting and battalions had been sent where needed, dispersing units and disorganizing the command structures. Regiments in reserve had not been able to conduct a Gegenstoß, which had left the battalions furthest forward unsupported, until Eingriff divisions arrived from the rearmost parts of the defences some hours later. By the 26th of September, all 3 regiments of each line-holding division had been deployed the front line, each holding an area 1,000 yards wide and 3,000 yards deep, with 1 battalion in the front line, 1 in support and the 3rd in close reserve. The 3 battalions of each regiment were to move forward successively to engage British battalions, which leapfrogged through those of the previous stage of an attack. The Eingriff divisions were to deliver a Gegenangriff later in the day, before the British could consolidate captured ground. The change was intended to remedy the neutralization of the front division reserves, which had occurred on the 20th of September because of the massed bombardments and barrages of the British artillery. The reserve battalion in each regimental sector would be able to counter-attack before the Eingriff divisions arrived. On the 22nd of September, new tactical requirements were laid down that more artillery bombardments were to be fired between British attacks, half of the artillery to conduct counter-battery fire against British artillery and the other half to bombard infantry positions. More infantry raids were to be conducted to induce the British to reinforce the front line and make a denser target for the German artillery. Improvements in artillery observation in the battle zone were also ordered, to increase the accuracy of German artillery fire as the British attack. Prelude. German offensive preparations. On the 23rd of September, Crown Prince Rupprecht wrote in his diary that the higher ground at Zonnebeke and Gelleveld was vulnerable to another British attack, and that it was vital that the German counterattack system did not fail again. Next day, Rupprecht wrote that he hoped that another British attack would be delayed, as the Fourth Army had insufficient reserves for the whole of the active front east of Ypres. Rupprecht ordered a Gegenangriff against the British flank between the Menin Road and Polygon Wood, which was longer since the attack on the 20th of September. Group Whiteskeed was to attack with the 50th Reserve Division, which had relieved the Bavarian Ersatz Division. The commander of Reserve Infantry Regiment 229 warned that the attack would fail, unless it was most carefully prepared and supported by an attack by Group Ypres opposite Polygon Wood, but the suggestion was overruled. The counter-attack was postponed by 1 day and command was transferred to Major Litzmann, the commander of Reserve Infantry Regiment 230. German plan of attack. On the 25th of September, German troops were to conduct a Gegenangriff on the 5th Army front opposite the 20th Division in 14th Corps and a bigger attack against the X-Corps front, in the center of the 2nd Army, south of the 1st Anzac Corps in Polygon Wood. The 50th Reserve Division had been the I Angriff division for Group Dixmude from the 10th of August to the 19th of September and was moved south to the Menin area as a reserve. The division then relieved the Bavarian Ersatz division on the 21st of September for an attack by a battalion in each of the 3 regimental sectors, on a 1,800-yard front, from the Menin Road north to Polygon Wood on the Gelleveld Plateau. The attack was to begin at 5:15 a.m. to recapture the Wilhelm Line opposite Group Whiteskeet, about 500 yards to the west from the Menin Road northwards to the Reutel Road, south of Polygon Wood. It was hoped that the attack would impose a delay on the British while fresh divisions were moved to the Flanders front, to re-establish the defensive system which had been overrun during the attack on the 20th of September. The 3 Battalion, RIR 229, was to attack north of the Reutelbeek, and 3 Battalion, RIR 230, was to attack from the Reutelbeek north to Polygon Wood, and troops from the 4th Army Storm Battalion were to attack in the area of RIR 231, on the Menin Road. British offensive preparations. On the 21st of September, Haig instructed the 5th and 2nd Armies to make the next step across the Gelleveld Plateau, on a front of 8,500 yards. The 1st Anzac Corps was to conduct the main advance of about 1,200 yards, to complete the occupation of Polygon Wood and capture the south end of Zonnebaker village. The 2nd Army altered its corps frontages soon after the attack of the 20th of September, so that each attacking division could be concentrated on a 1,000 yards front. The huge volume of shell fire from both sides had cut up the ground and destroyed roads. On the 20th of September, construction of new road and light railway circuits was begun behind the new front line, to carry artillery and ammunition forward, and finished in 4 days of fine weather. Bombardment and counter-battery fire began immediately, with practice barrages fired daily as a minimum. Artillery from 8th Corps and 9th Corps to the south fired bombardments to simulate preparations for an attack on Zandvoort and Warnton. Heavier equipment bogged in churned mud and had to be brought forward by wagons along the new roads and tracks, rather than being moved cross-country. Many of the new routes could be seen by German artillery observers on Passchendaele Ridge. The frontages of 8th and 9th Corps were moved northwards, the 10th Corps to take over 600 yards of front up to the southern edge of Polygon Wood, which kept the frontages of the 2 Australian divisions of 1st Anzac Corps to 1,000 yards each. The 33rd Division replaced the 23rd Division beyond the Menin Road on the night of 25th September, and the 5th Australian Division and 4th Australian Division replaced the 1st Australian Division and the 2nd Australian Division in Polygon Wood.